I'm going to start sharing my screen so you guys can see what we're. Oh, where is Alana hailing from? A beautiful country. I'm trying to answer very good. It is a beautiful country. So I am going to, yeah, share my screen. Just give me one moment. Yes. So again, as we said, happy Earth Week, happy Earth Day to everyone. I hope all of your Earth days or Earth weekends, everything was great. I actually am curious, before we properly start, did anyone do anything? Not my other dog making a mess. Sorry, guys. Don't have multiple dogs, they say. That's the issue. Um, did anyone basically, I know for here, when it happens to be Earth Day or the weekend before Earth Day, we all, like everybody on island, does a beach cleanup or a cleanup just around the island. Does anybody else do this or have different initiatives? Is it normal for anybody else? Please look. Okay, community outreach and bird banding. That's great. Yeah, I would also love to implement new initiatives for my country as well. So that sounds great. But yes, happy Earth Week, as I said. So we're actually going to start off with a mood check. And if you can see the Menti code, we're just going to do a slight little poll of how we've been feeling the week, how we are doing in general. Let me see. So I'm going to keep that code up there. And then after a little bit, I'm going to show the overall poll to see how everybody is doing. And the Mentimeter link was just posted in the chat, so you can put the code in there. Oh, we planted mangroves and trees grooming. Oh, that's so great. I wish we did that. The cleanups around Guyana, very nice. Planted corals. Hey, think you need to, I think you need to come over here to the Western Caribbean. Please. That is really amazing. Okay, let us check the poll. Well, actually, I'll put the code also in the chat in case anybody comes in later. Because there's actually something I wanted us to also talk about after the thing. So we will also use the Mentimeter chat. So let's just see how everybody is doing. Okay. Okay. Feeling a three, we're feeling a four. Who's having a one? Oh, are we okay? It's okay. Gosh, take time. Take time with yourself and for the rest of the week. It is almost the weekend, so I'm glad to see some other people are feeling fantastic. And also just a little thing, that little picture of bougainvilleas are my favorite flower, and that was taken here. Just to shameless plug, I had to say, Cape Ann has really nice plants and wildlife. But okay, so without further ado, let us get back into our lovely webinar. So, mm, so we are talking about rebuilding ecosystems and reviving the future, which is also, we're going to be talking about practical approaches to habitat restoration, species introduction, and long-term ecosystem monitoring. This is also Given Caribbean's Biodiversity Matters webinar number 7. On to many more. Very exciting. So we have a lovely full day of panelists, but I wanted to give some other background of what actually Earth Day is. So as we know, Giving Caribbeans is a community that stands to collaborate with local, international, regional organizations to support long-term conservation efforts, appreciation and use of biodiversity for the benefit present and future generations to come. So Earth Day is a global event, thankfully, held annually on April 22nd to raise awareness and support for environmental protection around the world. It brings together several people around the world in nearly 200 countries to take action against climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss, amongst several other pressures that are harming our beautiful planet. So it is considered a really big environmental campaign or amongst civil society. And just a little fun fact, it actually began in 1970, initiated by the US Senator Gaylord Nelson, following the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill, sadly. So aiming to channel anti-war student energy into environmental protection, the US Senator and an activist, Dennis Hayes, organized nationwide teach-ins, engaging 20 million Americans to protest industrial pollution. So I had no idea that is how Earth Day started. I just kind of was born and figured we celebrate the Earth, but love to hear it. So without further ado, we're going to get into our panelists. We're going to be starting off with the lovely Genevieve Renaud-Byrne. She is an environmental project manager and biologist dedicated to strengthening coastal resilience through marine management and restoration. She co-founded Anna Blue, I hope I pronounced that right, a nonprofit focused on marine restoration, research, and community engagement in the lovely twin island of Antigua and Barbuda. She now serves as a director of restoration, holding a master's in marine management. She brings experience leading community-based national scale environmental projects across public, nonprofit, and private sector organizations. Please, Ms. Genevieve, please take it away.
Good evening, and thank you so much, Danny, for that wonderful introduction. I'm feeling, I think I selected 5. I think I selected fantastic, but I'm also feeling very tired because we've been planting corals all week. And so just in the field 3 dives a day. And so I do apologize if I if I have a hard time finding my words, or if some things don't come out right, just let me know. I'm just feeling the impacts of a long day on the sea. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. This one here, perfect. And then I will go slideshow. Danny, that looks good, right? Give me a thumbs up. Perfect, okay. So as Danny said, my name is Genevieve Renaud-Byrne. Some people call me Genevieve, some people call me Jen. All forms of my name are totally fine. I am the director of restoration for Anew Blue. Anew is a play on words, right? We're mostly focused on restoration. So Anew, A-N-U, is pronounced like A-New. But it also makes reference to ANU, which is the country code for Antigua and Barbuda. And so that is the organization that I work for. And so just a little bit of background, I moved to Antigua and Barbuda 7 years ago. I had worked in other places in the Caribbean, and I'm originally from Canada, but my love for coral reefs really brought me to the tropics. So I've been here for 7 years, and when I first moved down to Antigua, I was hired by the Department of Environment to do coastal protection and renewable energy projects. And so I did that for about a year, and I really got to know the island, worked a lot with the community and other facets of the government. And I just learned so much, and it was fantastic. But my training was really in ocean conservation, and I really wasn't working on anything ocean related. So I was itchy to get back in the sea. And at the end of that 1 year contract, I also got to go to COP25 to represent Antigua and Barbuda. I met one of my heroes, Dr. Sylvia Earle, here pictured on the left. And it was a pivotal moment for me because I got to experience what conservation looked like on a global scale. And although I was hoping that I was going to leave feeling inspired to do more, I actually felt really deflated, because I just thought a lot of people were there to talk and no action was taking place. And so when I went back home to Antigua, I went for swims as I usually do, and I just saw so much devastation underwater. So this is what a typical coral reef looks like on the east coast of Antigua right now. As you can see, there's very few living corals, very few fish. Over time, everything is kind of broken up and eroded. And so I was at it was a prime time for me to kind of focus my career onto something new. And so I met with a colleague. Her name is Dr. Molly Wilson. She's here cheesing in the picture on the left. And she was just finishing up her PhD in marine biology, and we both had this drive to restore coral reefs. And we were very fortunate to meet people. This was actually during COVID, and so all the private homes here with very wealthy people were occupied. People were here in Antigua, and because there was not a lot of social interactions, people were willing to meet with you. And so it was a very special moment in time where I could get in the door and get funding to run a very simple marine study to see, okay, where are we at with our marine ecosystems? And we were fortunate, after providing these people with the results of our study, to gain more funding to actually do something about it. So that's when we incorporated the Elkhorn Marine Conservancy, which is now called Anew Blue. We just rebranded this year. And that was 5 years ago. So a lot has happened between then and now, and I'm happy to answer questions. But overall, our mission is to enhance the resilience and stewardship of Antigua and Barbuda's marine ecosystems. And we do this through 3 central pillars: restoration, research, and community engagement. And today, I'm just going to talk about restoration, but I'm happy to answer questions on all 3 of those pillars later. So before I get into the restoration work, we kind of need to understand why active coral reef restoration is so critical to helping the reef recover. So the first thing we need to understand is, how are these animals able to reproduce? And they do this by broadcast spawning. It's really amazing how corals do this, once or twice a year in most cases. The temperature of the water is just right. The moon is just at the perfect angle. And then all of them decide, of the same species, all corals of the same species decide to spawn at the exact same time. And so it's an incredible event. But what we're now discovering is that most corals actually need to be only a few meters or feet away from each other for their eggs and sperm to meet in the water column. And so what we're seeing now is, because so many corals have died in the last 5 or 6 decades, they're too few and far between to really successfully reproduce, right? They're maybe half a kilometer away from one another in some cases, or even closer, maybe they're 100 feet away from each other, but the current isn't bringing their gametes together. So they're not able to recover on their own without a helping hand. And this is specifically the case for critically endangered species like the elkhorn coral or the staghorn coral, which is almost functionally extinct in most of the Caribbean islands. And so without assistance, many of these corals will go extinct. And just to go through this really quickly, this is one form of coral reef restoration. This is active in situ restoration. So we first start by collecting fragments from healthy coral colonies. We'll bring them into underwater nurseries. We'll grow them there for about a year. And then we'll cut pieces from those nursery fragments and we'll plant them onto the reef. And then, of course, over time, we'll monitor how our restoration has created a positive impact for reef fish, the reef benthos, and the people that utilize those reefs for their livelihoods. These are just examples of what the nursery structures look like. So we have different styles. The ones on the left and the one in the middle is really for the branching corals, like elkhorn and staghorn coral. And then on the right, we have the tiles that are holding small pieces of star and brain corals. And over time, those three pieces that you see in the picture are actually going to grow, touch each other, realize that they're the same animal, and reskin the entire tile in the span of about a year. And so that's kind of the way that we restore boulder coral species. Outplanting is actually pretty simple nowadays. We use things like coral clips, which is a nail that has a little piece of metal that keeps the coral down on the seafloor. We use zip ties, epoxy, we've used cement. And these are the corals that we grow. So we really are focusing on stony corals that are building the framework that is needed for a coral reef environment, right? These are really the backbone of the coral reef. As of now, after 5 years, we now have nurseries kind of dotted across the island, mostly on the east, north, and southwest, as you can see here, and multiple restoration sites. And these numbers are actually a little bit outdated. We've got over 5,000 coral fragments growing across our nurseries, and we're currently restoring almost 5 acres of reef, and that is actually expanded a lot in the last few weeks. We also have 2 research grade tank systems, so on-land tanks that we can bring our corals into if the water gets too hot or if there's a disease epidemic. And we're working with many genetically distinct heat-tolerant genotypes. So these are all genetically distinct corals, much like you and I would be genetically distinct humans. Our team has grown in the last 5 years, and really fortunate to work with such an amazing team of individuals that come from various different backgrounds. We work with fishermen, professional divers, scientists, young people who are just interested, and we have a great base of volunteers as well. Now I'm just going to touch on what it means to be planting coral reefs right now, which obviously a very difficult time for coral reefs across the world. And I'm going to touch on a few challenges that we've experienced and how we've been able to surmount those challenges, and also touch on some challenges that we haven't been able to address yet. So really, when we're talking about coral restoration, there is a plethora of challenges that are against us. These are some of the key ones. Lack of genetic diversity and abundance in critically endangered species obviously limits how we can restore these species and the ecosystems that they make. Heat stress is a huge issue right now due to climate change. In 2023 and 2024, I'll talk about this a little bit later, we had one of the biggest heat waves kind of impacting, over 80% of reefs worldwide. We have a lot of fouling by macroalgae and cyanobacteria, a lot of disease. This is an issue that we don't know a lot about. There seems to be new diseases emerging all the time. Sometimes we're not even sure if it is a disease or if it's just tissue necrosis due to stress. There's also numerous other impacts that are local to us, like pollution, dredging, destruction of mangroves and seagrass beds that are, those adjoining ecosystems. They all work together to be healthy. Physical impacts due to improper anchoring and unsustainable tourism. And of course, sargassum, especially on the east coast of Antigua, has been a huge issue for these ecosystems. And then finally, something that's always a struggle for all NGOs, I feel, especially in this region, is sustainable funding over time, and just having a team that has the skill sets needed to grow the restoration work so that it has a meaningful impact at a national scale. So I'm just going to touch on 2 challenges just so that I stay on time. And Danny, feel free to just interrupt me if I'm going on for too long, because I have not been looking at the time. So the first is heat stress. I feel like a lot of you will know about, what's been happening on this front. But in 2023, we had sustained heating for 12 weeks. Most corals, when they get hot, they bleach, right? They expel the algae that lives within their cells, and that algae is responsible for feeding them. It gives them 80 to 90% of their energy. And so if they don't have them, they can't really survive for very long. Some can survive, 2 to 3 weeks, but most die after a month. And so we lost a lot of corals during that time. And as a coral reef restoration group, it was very difficult to see a lot of the corals in our nurseries struggle. So what we did about it is, during that time, instead of crying in my mask, which I have done on many occasions, we decided to swim around the island and look for the corals that seemed completely unfazed, right? No bleaching, no disease. It is super hot and they are totally fine. And then what we would do is we would take a GPS coordinate over that colony. And we did this in most of the shallow reefs across Antigua. And then we went back when the heating had stopped, and we took fragments from those coral colonies and we brought them into our nursery. And as a result, ever since we did that, 99.8% of our corals are healthy within our nurseries. So they're really heat tolerant genotypes. And I think that is key when you're planting reefs for the future, because we're going to see more of these heating events happening over time. And then we recently planted those corals, I want to say almost a year ago, actually. And within our last monitoring survey, which would have been 7 to 8 months after we planted the corals, 88% of our planted corals were super healthy. A lot of them had, skinned over the reef and started to grow those arms up to the sun. And so it was very encouraging. Another challenge is plants taking over. Sure, if you've been on a snorkel recently on a reef, you've probably seen a lot of dead coral skeleton and a lot of plants. Macroalgae and fouling is an issue both on the reef and in the nursery. So on the left here, you can see a star coral just being totally smothered by Dictyota, which is one of the most pervasive macroalgae species that we have in the Caribbean. And then on the right, you can see a tree in our nursery that wasn't, nobody had cleaned it in a while because it wasn't growing anything on it except for cyanobacteria. So it shows how much can grow on the structures if you just leave them unattended. And one of the ways that we dealt with this problem was by finding nursery sites that were really close to existing and healthy or healthier reef habitat, because those reef habitats tend to have more herbivores, and the herbivores are eating the macroalgae off of the nursery structures, but they're also eating it around the outplanted corals. And so finding nursery sites and outplant sites that are free of macroalgae or have less macroalgae, but also have really healthy fish and invertebrate populations that like to eat plants. And yeah, I think that's really where I'm going to end it for today. I'm happy to go back to my slide about key challenges and talk more about, some of them that we're struggling with, and take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. That was actually really, really insightful. I really enjoyed it. Okay, we already have our raised hand, so please, Ashley, you may go first.
Hi, Genevieve. Thank you for your presentation. It was a good one. It was very insightful. It's actually myself and my husband here together. We work on regenerative agriculture. So it's nice to see very similar concepts, but on an ocean perspective, basically.
Yeah, that's that we don't actually have a lot of knowledge, or we have no experience on whatsoever, but we like seeing this pushing us further. I do have a question. the types of corals that you are seeing to have more resilience, uh, are there similarities between those corals or the different spots, or is it the same species, similar species, or anything like that?
That's
Yeah,
a
like
great
if it's
question.
an array of species or if it's limited to a few.
Yeah, great question. So heat tolerance specifically, you can definitely see a difference between species. So if we're talking about, for example, the grooved brain coral, typically those corals can sustain heat for so much longer periods of time. They can sustain heat. I've seen some sustain heat for 2 months straight. Absolutely no problem. And they're in about a meter of depth. And then you look at other corals like the elkhorn coral is a lot more sensitive. It will bleach right away and a lot of them will die soon thereafter. And so there is a difference in heat tolerance between species. Now, when it comes to the individual coral, obviously there are corals within those species that are more resilient than their counterparts. And so why is that? It's much like how you and me might have a different resistance to something like COVID, for example. It's down to our genetics. But for corals, it's also about the algae that lives within their tissue. And so there's some algae that are more resilient to heat than others. And so some corals will actually select a specific clade of, we call them zooxanthellae, to live within their tissue because they're more resilient to heat stress. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it actually does help a bit with the understanding. There have been attempts at taking this algae and trying it with different species of coral to try to see if resilience would increase.
Yes, yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of people doing that in the lab right now. And so they'll stimulate the coral to bleach, release its zooxanthellae, and then it'll move the coral into an environment where it has to select a different zooxanthellae to come into their tissue. And we are seeing changes in their heat stress resilience.
That is excellent. That is
It's
very excellent.
fantastic. Yeah, I think it's very difficult to do in the field, right? So we're in the business of actively restoring ecosystems. Um, that is more right now on the research level. And so there aren't practical methods for us to implement that in the field context as yet.
I would imagine that would be very difficult because, I mean, for us, we rely on trying to regenerate basically native soil microbiome. So
Okay.
we actually feed plants to be able to have them build up food reserves in the soil, basically, and that feeds the types of bacteria and fungi there to be able to carry the nutrients back to the plants to help them thrive. So I could see where in a soil medium that makes sense in terms of having some degree of control, but in the ocean it really is a completely different scenario.
I would imagine that there would be a lot of similarities, just, it's not our field of understanding. We concede to that, but it's really nice to know that a lot of considerations to the microbiome, because that's our biggest focus as well.
Yeah, the microbiome is also very interesting to us. We started to run an experiment to see if sponges would have a beneficial impact on the microbiome of corals. And we're just running the water samples now through. Yeah, we're getting the results now, so we don't know as yet. But there are definitely other species of corals or other animals that live on the seafloor near corals that have a beneficial impact on the microbiome, much like what you're describing in the soil and plants. So a lot of similarities.
That's really great to hear.
Yeah, especially when we look at fish, we look at, okay, so from our basic knowledge, we look at parrotfish, but we know that there may be other types of fish that will do it. We look at what type of microbes will be on their skin, would be some of my thoughts, on their scales, not just the fecal matter, and how that will contribute by interaction.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's very difficult to study this, obviously, because the ocean is, just a lot of water. So yeah, and it's very much an emerging science when it comes to coral restoration. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want to hog the question sections.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'd love to hear the back and forth. I'm just going to read a question from the chat saying, how do you all decide which reef areas to prioritize for restoration?
Yeah, that's also a great question. Right now, because we're working with critically endangered species and we have so few of them left, it's really important that we choose sites that will allow for a highest degree of survivability, right? We want them to survive once we've planted them. And so we have a very strict criteria that includes the depth, includes what's going on the sea floor. So are there other competitors? To what degree are those competitors really overtaking the seafloor? Are there fish? Are there other impacts around? Like, is there dredging happening nearby? Is this a site that gets gill netted very often? And so there's all these criteria that we have to assess when we're choosing sites. And then things like water flow are very important for most coral species. And so it's actually very difficult to choose a site because a lot of the reefs in Antigua, as I was saying, are full of macroalgae. And we really don't want to be planting corals where they might be smothered by plants. But we do have a select few sites. One of them is just north of Green Island, if you know Antigua. And we're planting there today, and there's almost no macroalgae on the seafloor. Of course, it's in the surf zone, so it's very hard to plant there. But the corals are extremely happy once you plant them there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Zoya, would you happen to be ready to go next?
Yes, ready to go.
Okay, perfect. I am going to be introducing our next panelist, Zoya. Don't worry about your questions. Please write them down in the chat, and we will have a little section to ask all panelists our other questions at the towards the end of the other presentations. Just for time's sake, I would like everybody to get their moment to explain. So, I am just going to share my screen very quickly and showcase the lovely Zoya. So we are going to be talking about what she does. So Zoya Buckmire is a tropical conservation biologist from Grenada with a varied background including bird, mangrove, and terrestrial invasive plant surveys. She has about a decade of experience closely involved with mangrove restoration throughout her home state of Grenada and a master's degree with a thesis focused on mangrove community structure, plasticity, and restoration planning. In her current role with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Regional Office, she applies her combination of monitoring, communications, and management skills to improve the governance of wetlands across the region. Thank you so much, Zoya, for even being here. And thank you again to Genevieve for doing a really great presentation. So you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to this presentation. Of course, very open to questions. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Please let me know when you can see the first slide.
It says it's loading currently.
Okay, it's okay, great. So this is my presentation. Of course, with the theme for Earth Week, I'm talking about rebuilding ecosystems and the practical and science-based approaches to mangrove restoration in Grenada, because that is my background. Just a little bit about me. I'm from Grenada, of course, the beautiful tri-island state of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, and I'm a tropical conservation biologist with a varied background, as I said, but I've done a little bit of everything. I've done some bird work, some turtle work, some marine surveys, and I primarily do wetland work, which thankfully allows me to combine a few of my loves, which are mangroves and birds. And just because I know that our community is relatively young and we might have some people who are interested in how I got here and what my career path has been, I have a bachelor's in marine wildlife conservation biology, and I have a master's in natural resource management. And I've done a variety of tasks and roles over the years, from field technician, field coordinator, project administration and management. I'm a writer, I'm a copy editor. As I mentioned, I currently work for the IUCN, and I'm a project liaison, which is a combination of all of these roles put together. So it's been a varied path, but if anyone was interested, or if anyone wants to talk about their career path or recommendations for programs or so on, I would be very happy to discuss that with you. So for a brief history of the restoration history in Grenada, there are a couple organizations that are currently working in the mangrove restoration space. It started in Carriacou in the 90s with Keto Foundation, but most of the pictures I have here were done by Grenada Fund for Conservation in the last 20 years. So the first site that was restored as a mangrove on the island of Grenada was in Warburton Bay, and this started in 2009 post-hurricane. So we had a major hurricane in 2004, that was Hurricane Ivan, and a lot of our mangroves were not recovering as they should have been in 2006 when an assessment was done. So Grenada Fund for Conservation was basically formed out of this need to address the lack of natural recovery in the mangroves. And through a lot of community work, a lot of youth engagement, this is what the site currently looks like now. We have ongoing interpretation at the site. We do have a bird watching tower, an interpretive center, and a boardwalk for bird watching. So this is kind of the flagship site of GFC and the work that we've done for mangrove restoration. Another similar site nearby that was similarly damaged in those hurricanes in 2004, 2005 is Calibini, and a lot of cleanup work, and then natural regeneration. And it's important to note here, a little bit of subtle foreshadowing, but the species that naturally regenerated at this site is white mangroves. We'll come back to that. And this is what the site looks like now. It's good to go. We had very little to do in terms of active replanting. Most of what we did was removing the threats, removing the garbage, and allowing the site to naturally regenerate. And then another comparison, this is my father, Mr. Zoya Buckmire. He founded Grenada Fund for Conservation. And for comparison, he is 6.5 feet tall. So in 2019, these plants that had been planted about 1.5 years before this were about 7 feet tall, and 2 years later, they were 15 feet tall. So this is just showing the rate of growth that you can experience under the best conditions. And this is an aerial shot of that same mangrove. And these are red mangroves because most of us in the Caribbean, most places that are doing restoration work and replanting work are using red mangroves. But we don't only have to talk about the successes. I do want to mention a failure or a not as successful site within the same basin, within the same bay as the other site I just showed. We had a similar replanting effort, and this site was not previously a mangrove. It was a newly exposed coastline that was experiencing very severe erosion. And so we did the same thing. We planted some red mangroves, and a few of them took, but most of the red mangroves in this site either burned or dried out. And it's important to note that red mangroves are not the be all and end all. And if you throw red mangroves at that problem, it's not necessarily going to fix it if you don't understand the root of the issue. So some considerations for mangrove restoration are, of course, that community and social issues should always be a part of the equation, especially since project funding tends to be really sporadic. If you have people invested in the project only for the very temporary financial gain without understanding the importance of restoration, the importance of the ecosystem that you're working to restore, then that work is not going to be sustainable. The next thing is that replanting is not restoration. restoration should be really holistic. It can sometimes be just fixing the hydrology, just removing the threats without putting a single mangrove plant into the ground. And that can, in some cases, be more successful than throwing seedlings at the problem. So replanting in and of itself is not restoration. And then the last thing, as I just showed, is that red mangroves are not suited to every single environment. They're not suited to every zone of the ecosystem. And so we really need to be adaptable and use science to inform the way that we restore or plant mangroves. And that's where we come into my thesis research. So over the years, through my experience with the Grenada Fund for Conservation, I've noticed these things that I said, hey, how can we improve the way that we plan and do mangrove restoration? So I chose to focus on the white mangrove. And as you can see here, the white mangrove is incredibly diverse. It's a really interesting plant. It can produce two types of aerial roots. So it can produce pneumatophores at the bottom, very similar to what you would see with black mangroves. It can also produce adventitious roots or prop roots, very similar to what you would see with red mangroves. And so white mangroves have this incredible plasticity, or this ability to adapt to the environment, that allows it to be what I think a species that we should be using more in restoration efforts. So when we talk about how to plan for restoration, we should be considering zonation. And if you look at the top figure, this is what you would find if you Googled mangrove restoration. It will say red mangroves are found at the front, black mangroves are found in the middle, white mangroves are found on land, and it will never differ from this. However, the figure at the bottom is generated from some of the data from my research. And you can see it's a much more nuanced, much more diverse situation than the top figure would lead you to believe. So zonation refers to the arrangement of species within a space. So for mangroves, if you're looking at a cross-section of a mangrove, where are the different species sitting? Where are their limits? Where are their tolerances? And the reason it's important to understand this is we cannot choose appropriate species for restoration if we don't know where the species are growing and why they're growing in these areas. So that is a question that my research aimed to investigate, basically. So zonation is very complex. It's informed by all of these things. That is the water conditions, the soil conditions, the life history of the individual species, what they like, what they don't like, chronic disturbances like pollution, episodic disturbances like hurricanes, biotic interactions, which is competition among the mangrove species, predation by crabs, all of these different factors, as well as plasticity. And zonation will also differ by forest type, because not all mangrove forests are created equal. And if there are 5 different recognized types of mangrove forests, why would we assume that the zonation is the same in these different types of forests? So here's an aerial shot of my 2 study sites from my master's research. And on the left, we have a basin site, fringe mangrove site. And as you can see, these are very different systems. One is directly connected to the sea. One has very predictable tidal influence. One has a sandbank that separates it from the sea. So it's different elevations and it's different tidal influences. As you can see, the basin site is kind of shaped like a bowl or a basin. And so the elevation in the middle of the site is lower than the seaward edge. You're going to get different species in the middle of a basin forest than you are going to get in the middle of a fringe forest. And that's basically the key finding of my 3 years of research. I'm going to skip this a little bit, but I would love to talk about the results further. If anyone is interested in mangrove structural zonation, I have a lot to say about it. Please contact me. But this is the main result, right? At the top, we have a fringe forest. This is what we would expect from the diagrams. A fringe forest has red mangroves at the front and then black and white mangroves at the back. It says you can and probably should plant red mangroves in that seaward zone. However, if you have a basin forest, the elevation is different. The conditions in the middle of the site are different. So you should not be planting red mangroves. High elevation is probably not getting enough tidal influence. You would want to switch out the species that you're using in this area. And the plasticity of white mangroves is really helpful in this case because they're incredibly adaptable. They can produce those that I mentioned, similar to black mangroves, similar to white mangroves. And they can grow in any zone of the mangrove. They do have a preference for high elevation sites, but they can grow in low elevation conditions as well. And this is a very simplified, please let me know how I'm doing for time. I can't see the Zoom screen. This is a very simple schematic of the adaptations that different mangrove species have to the water depth gradient, right? So this is what we expect, that white mangroves are inland, they don't have any aerial roots. Black mangroves are in medium depth water because they have pneumatophores. And red mangroves are in the deepest water because they have adventitious roots. But as we just discussed, as we just saw, white mangroves can have all three. So theoretically and in practice, because I've seen this in the field, white mangroves can be found in every one of these zones, along the water depth gradient because they have this plasticity in root form. So what does that mean? Zonation is really important to consider when we're talking about mangrove restoration. We need to understand where the species naturally grow in order to make the appropriate selection for restoration. Zonation is extremely complex. We need to consider the forest type and we need to do site-specific assessments because no two mangrove forests are the same, and throwing red mangroves at the problem is not going to fix it. We need to understand the specific conditions at each site. And the different species can be differently adapted to different conditions, especially white mangroves. And if they're very plastic, if they're very adaptable, this can be a positive when we're thinking about restoration, because if the conditions at the site change, the plant that you've placed there is still able to change with the site. But I'm not saying that we should be planting white mangroves everywhere, because we should always be aiming to have a multi-species approach and put in a variety of species if we've determined that planting is necessary. And so I have linked in my presentation that I'm sure the team will share with everybody some publications and some resources if you're interested in learning more about mangrove restoration. We've done a manual for Grenada, building off of the work that Grenada Fund for Conservation has done, as well as an in-situ growth experiment that we did for all three species. There's some data, as well as a recent publication on the plasticity of white mangroves and how that contributes to community zonation. So these links are in the presentation. And here is my email. Thank you for listening.
I was trying to clap and then I realized I was muted. So thank you. Thank you so much, Zoya. That was really good. Thank you. We already have some questions in the chat. So this is from Adrian Watson. He says, what was the hydrology like for the failed area in Jamaica? Some of more successful sites, all they had to do was open a channel to allow flow.
Okay, thank you. That's a great question because, of course, as I mentioned, restoration, sometimes all you have to do is restore hydrology or adjust the hydrology of the site, and the mangroves will naturally regenerate. I'll give two examples of failed projects. The first is a very coastal site where we planted red mangroves, on that seaward edge where they're supposed to be. But we had a hurricane. So that was the first thing, completely out of our control. We had a hurricane and these plants just were not established enough to save themselves in that situation. The second instance, which is the one I showed the picture of, the plants were simply planted at too high of an elevation for red mangroves to establish well. And the area where it was planted was not historically a mangrove, but as I mentioned, that area was experiencing really severe erosion. And so the coastline was not what the coastline used to be. And in the attempt to create that natural barrier, the options were completely washed out, sea level, or slightly elevated, not even a meter. I think it was 40 or 50 centimeters above sea level. But even that elevation was too much for the sites, and it was not natural water flow. So those were the challenges we had in the areas that I mentioned. But I do really love to see sites where all you have to do is open a channel, or all you have to do is remove the stressor, and the site will basically take care of itself.
That's actually really great. Oh, Adrian responded. Actually, Genevieve, are you still here?
Hello? Yes, I've just
Hi.
changed location.
Sorry. I also kind of wanted to give us a little moment just for Catherine. I will get to Sharina, but I want to read out Catherine's answer if possible. Um, so she said ecosystem restoration does not happen in isolation. What's happening with seagrass or mangrove ecosystems? Oh wait, that's not for Genevieve. That's for,
I think it may have been. I saw it before.
okay,
She's
my
right.
fault. Yeah, you are right. My fault.
Yeah.
My mind completely switched to mangroves. So that's where I was like, oh, so
It's a
what's
good
happening with
segue, honestly.
yeah, it's a
Yeah, it was a
connection. It's
perfect
a connection.
segue.
It's a good one. So you both could actually answer. What's happening with seagrass or mangrove ecosystems? How are root causes of coral destruction, example, land-based pollution being addressed? What's the community connection to the restoration effort?
Wow, there's so many questions in that, and I don't want to take too much airtime here. Well, mangroves and seagrass and coral reefs, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, Zoya. They work together. We call it the power of three. So the water comes down from, whatever it is, it comes down from the island and it gets filtered through the mangroves. So if you don't have mangroves, you don't have a barrier between what's happening on land and what's happening in the ocean. So it's very important that they stay put. And then the seagrass also acts as a filtration, sediment retention. Not to mention, both of these habitats are really important for fish nurseries. So this is where you find all the babies before they move and graduate to the coral reef. So you're so right. Ecosystem restoration does not happen in isolation. I think this is something that Zoya can speak to. When we're talking about working in the ocean, we have to apply for a permit from the Fisheries Division, but we don't need to talk to anybody that owns land. When you're talking about restoring mangroves, most of the time you have to take a land approach. And like you were just saying, you have to restore the hydrology, or you have to access the land and plant, as she was describing. And so um, although they shouldn't happen in isolation, they often do, just because of the administrative and the barriers in place for habitat restoration to happen on land. We're very lucky in the sense that in a lot of the areas that we work with, the mangroves are still intact and very much functional. And the seagrass beds are doing very well as well. It's not to say that we don't have challenges in both of those areas, but they are, I would say, functioning. The power of three is working. So that's good. How are root causes of coral destruction, like land-based pollution, being addressed? We are trying, but honestly, it's an advocacy game at this point, and trying to work with the government, which is always difficult because they need to prioritize the economy. And so we do advocate and use data to inform policy, and we try to advocate for regulations to be applied, so enforcement. And what's the community connection to the restoration effort? Community connection is super important to us. We do meetings with fisher folk, tourism operators, and then just general kind of community open houses and presentations about our work. So everyone's able to get involved, and we provide opportunities for people to join the field of conservation by offering employment and volunteer opportunities. I think that's it for me.
Zoya, anything you may want to add at all?
No, nothing to add. I'm glad that it was asked because, of course, it's not isolated, and what happens with your mangroves does affect your coral reefs and vice versa. I have not gotten into the world of coral reef restoration as yet, but I do think Genevieve's answer touches on the connections between those different ecosystems.
Thank you so much for answering, and thank you so much for your presentation. And thank you, Catherine, actually, for that question. So I'm glad that we got to answer that. So Carla, just to check in, are you doing good?
Yes, I'm good. I'm right here.
Okay, perfect. So I am just going to share my screen once more so I can introduce her properly. Um, okay. All right. So hold on. There we go. Panelist three. Is Carla Daniel. So Carla Daniel has worked on projects targeting trees, birds, bats, geckos, parrotfish, spiders, and even fungi. Okay. A conservation leadership in the Caribbean Fellow. She has conducted training sessions, presentations, and workshops around the region, sharing knowledge and building capacity. For the last 21 years, Carla, who is the Barbados Country Coordinator for the wider Caribbean Sea Turtle Conservation Network, has dedicated her time to the conservation of sea turtles, in particular, the critically endangered hawksbill. Through her work with the Barbados Sea Turtle Project, where she is currently director, she has advocated tirelessly for the protection of all of our vulnerable coastlines and the maintenance of the delicate balance, which allows our ecosystems to be preserved and our people to thrive. Please take it away, Carla. You can. Let
Oh,
me
I
stop
think you
sharing.
need to disable your
Yeah,
screen first.
I was about to say I'm the problem.
All right, let me try that again. Okay, are we good? Yes, fantastic. All right, so good night, everybody. My name is Carla Daniel, and as was mentioned, I work with the Barbados Sea Turtle Project. So please excuse me because this is the busiest time of the year, and I only joined the panel on Tuesday. So this is all put together very quickly this afternoon. But if you have any questions, please let me know and give me some grace if there are any mistakes on any of these slides. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is the conservation commitment. And this really feeds into long-term monitoring. Sorry, let me just, there you go. So how did we get here? My background really is in ecology and biology. I did a BSc at University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. And I followed that up with a master's on the Barbados bullfinch. So I did my master's on birds. But what really kind of, I guess you could say, sparked this entire thing was an amazing secondary school teacher. And this CXC project that I had to do, and we did one on seagrass beds, mangrove swamps, and coral reefs, and the connection between the three. And after spending time snorkeling and exploring the mangroves, and we went on a submarine to see the reefs, which was amazing, I decided that I was going to be an environmentalist. At the time, I was picturing more of a tree hugger and chaining myself in front of tractors and stopping the man and the government. But it's not quite what it evolved to be, but that was what started it all. So over the years, I've done quite a lot. These are from my days at UE, frolicking around, did a project on macrofungi. It was tons of fun. I've also worked on sargassum, did some work with FAO on sargassum management plans when sargassum influx first started, and also looking at its impact on biodiversity, as well as valorization of sargassum. Followed that up with some work on the world's cutest gecko, which is our endemic leaf-toed gecko. This is a gecko that we thought was extinct. We were very sure it was gone forever. And then it was rediscovered on a tiny rock offshore Barbados. And when I say rock, I mean a rock. We have no offshore islands. We are not blessed. It is just Barbados. And the tiniest stone, and that is where this gecko is. Since then, it's been found in a few different places. But this was, I think, one of the most rewarding projects that I've worked on. It is critically endangered, but it's still existing, and the government is working really hard to ensure that it continues. My love, however, has been for sea turtles. So while I was at UE in undergrad, I saw a flyer on a notice board, and I started to volunteer in 2006 with the Barbados Sea Turtle Project. And 21 years later, I am still here. Sea turtles are absolutely amazing. Sea turtle conservation is hard, don't get me wrong, but after just about 2 decades, I think when people ask me the question, do you like sea turtles? I would have to say yes. Sea turtle, we have 3 species of sea turtles nesting in Barbados. We have hawksbills, leatherbacks, and greens. Unfortunately, all are not, it sounds terrible, but they're not all listed as endangered anymore because green turtles, Chelonia mitis, have recently been downlisted. In Barbados, our hawksbill nesting beaches overlap almost exactly with our primary tourist areas. So there is major human-wildlife conflict. Our nesting season officially runs from the 1st of June to the 30th of November. And so the Barbados Sea Turtle Project essentially works to make sure that the thousands of turtles that are coming to our shores every year are able to nest safely and to return to the water unharmed, and that those eggs that they lay are able to incubate safely, and then the hatchlings that are produced are able to get to the water. It sounds really simple. The turtles are going to do most of the heavy lifting and most of the work. You would think that we're just kind of there to watch and maybe to lend a hand occasionally. Unfortunately, that is not quite the case. We operate a 24-hour hotline, which is monitored every single day of the year. And through 35 years of monitoring, Barbados now has the largest nesting population of hawksbill sea turtles in the insular Caribbean. We have 24 beaches on our coast that are monitored. We monitor with 2 patrol shifts. We have night patrol. So from the 1st of June all the way to the middle of November, every single night, we have 3 teams on the beach, and they're working from 7 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. And we have 2 teams in the daytime, and they are working from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then the couple hours between those 2 shifts, we have persons who are monitoring our hotline. So we have 24-hour coverage during the season. Every single nesting season, we rescue 50,000 plus hatchlings from properties, the road, car parks, everywhere, and ensure that they're safely released. And our hotline receives over 2,000 unique calls each nesting season. Each season, we have a team of 40 plus volunteers and interns, and each of those is working 3 to 5 shifts per week. So it is a pretty big endeavor. When the Barbados Sea Turtle Project started collecting data around 1997, there were only 50 individual hawksbills recorded nesting on the entire island of Barbados. At that time, it was still legal to eat sea turtles, as it is still in some of our islands right now. In 1998, the Barbados government passed a moratorium that was strongly influenced by the lobbying of the Sea Turtle Project at the time, and it ended the harvest in Barbados, and it has continued to be closed. Through a lot of public education work, as well as a lot of monitoring, a lot of research, we've been able to increase our numbers, and our peak is still over 900 individual turtles tagged and recorded in 2015. At present, we currently see about 600 to 700 each year. So we've had a times magnitude increase. I feel particularly good about this because there are a lot of places in the Caribbean where, unfortunately, their sea turtle populations have not been recovered. If we think back to the time of the British coming to the region, there are records of persons saying that when they docked their ships, they had to walk on the backs of turtles to get to shore. That is how many turtles we have. We had persons canning turtle meat and exporting to America. We had thousands and thousands of hawksbill turtles killed for their shell, and that shell was exported to Japan and to other countries. And so these populations were truly just destroyed. So the fact that in some places we've been able to recover them, I think is really a miracle. So this is our 2024 nesting team. It takes a lot of cooks. And these are not all Barbadians. We have an international internship program. And we have persons in this photo from Grenada. We have 2 Trinis right there in the middle. This year, our team is actually going to have persons from Jamaica and from Trinidad and Grenada again as well. So it's really a huge kind of regional effort. And that's something that is really important to remember. Sea turtles are, I'm going to repeat, sea turtles are a migratory species and a shared resource. There's no amount of conservation that I can do in Barbados, or you can do in Cayman Islands or Grenada or Trinidad, that is going to protect those turtles once they leave the boundaries of your exclusive economic zone. Once they get into another country's waters, their laws are what is going to pertain. And if they have legal harvest, your turtles will be cooked. And it is that simple. So one of the things that as Caribbean people, we should be advocating for as conservationists, we should be advocating for is regional conservation policies where our migratory species are concerned. It really is not good enough for one country to be spending decades, spending resources, spending time, spending money, trying to protect a species, and then it swims a couple thousand kilometers and that same animal is killed. That's a minor tangent, but we're going to go on. So I mentioned that sea turtle conservation in Barbados was difficult. This is a lot of what it looks like. A lot of our conservation interventions have to do with sea turtles interacting with coastal armoring structures. They have to do with sea turtles leaving narrow beaches because we've seen a lot of erosion and getting into properties, getting into the road where they may be struck by cars. We have severe erosion on the coastline. Everybody's experiencing hurricanes and storms, but even beyond hurricanes and storms, when we have swells and other weather events, our beaches are so narrow and so vulnerable that they cause sand to be lost and all of the eggs buried in that sand go as well. We also have, the thing is that we have hawksbill turtles, and hawksbills are the most tenacious of sea turtles. There's a picture here of one climbing steps, and you can see that they will try their best to find somewhere to nest. The fact that they're able to climb steps and to get onto properties and to get off the beach can lead to some fatal situations, sadly. There's, of course, strandings. This could be due to bycatch from fishing nets or boat strikes or a variety of disease, a variety of other things. Our conservation doesn't just include adult turtles and eggs. Of course, we also have a hatchling ICU because we believe that no turtle, even though people may say hatchling survival is 1 in 1,000, no turtle is left behind. So we have like a little ICU set up where we keep premature baby turtles until they're ready to be released. So this image here in the glove, that is a premature leucistic hatchling that's lacking pigment, and it was rehabilitated and released. So what are the challenges? So the Barbados Sea Turtle Project was a project of the University of the West Indies for much of its existence. However, in 2023, we're at a crossroads. The founder of the project, Professor Julia Horrocks, was retiring from the university, and we did not know what to do. On the one hand, we're like, oh my God, we're tired. It has been like a long fought battle, fighting for funding, fighting, to be able to get the resources that we needed, fighting construction, fighting development, fighting politicians, just fighting. And it is draining. It's mentally taxing. It was a long 20 years of not necessarily, and these are the things that people don't sometimes talk about, not necessarily having a stable salary because your salary is dependent upon grants and donations. So your contracts are typically short. So you often make progress with your conservation work, but your personal life might be in limbo because you can't go to the bank and get a loan to get a mortgage to build a house. You can't afford children if you wanted them. So there are lots of things that wear on you, both on, somebody mentioned feeling, I think, deflated, Genevieve earlier. There are a lot of things that weigh on you when you think about the global conservation challenges, when we think about regional challenges, national challenges, but there are also personal challenges that weigh on you as well. So we were at a crossroads in 2023, and what we decided to do actually was to leave the University of the West Indies, and we founded a charity called Wild Isle Trust. So the Barbados Sea Turtle Project is now managed by a charity called Wild Isle Trust. We found an office space, which is this one, And yeah, we kept going. So what are those primary challenges? Funding is a big one. Human capacity is difficult as well, but that's linked to funding because most grants have a cap for administrative costs. So you can find money to do endless projects. But if you want to get money to pay people, then they say that can only be 10% of your budget. So you have to be really innovative to be able to find funding to pay persons a living wage. And that's the other thing, because in conservation, a lot of people work off of passion. And that is great. You find passionate people and they're willing to take a very small salary or a stipend because they just believe in the job. The thing is that that doesn't keep people, because eventually they recognize that passion doesn't pay their bills and it doesn't put food in their fridge. And it's really not fair when we have people who are so passionate that they're working long extended hours, bank holidays, weekends, and we're not able to pay them what they're worth. And a lot of that, again, depends on funding. National challenges can include a lack of legislation, and it can also include developmental conflicts. We are small islands, we are resource limited, we have little space, and our people want to improve their standard of living. We all want to improve our standard of living. And a lot of that means more tourism development, dreams of more tourists, selling more land. In some countries that have the resources, it might mean oil exploration, it may mean more manufacturing, even something like agriculture. You know, we want to be food resilient. How do you tell somebody you can't cut down this mangrove or you can't move this forest in order to plant food for your people because you're trying to reduce your export bill? So there are a lot of social concerns where development goes. And of course, there's money talks a lot as well. And we have a lot of persons with huge pockets, as was mentioned earlier as well. And often their desires to purchase and to develop and to invest override any other concerns. And sometimes we tend to have the perspective that we will leap for it now, grab the money with both hands, and any issues, environmental or social or otherwise, we'll worry about that later and we'll fix it later. And then, of course, there are the species-specific threats, because sea turtles have a myriad of threats that affect every single life stage. So I've listed some. So disorientation, this is due to their attraction to light. So instead of going to the sea, the hatchlings go in the brightest direction. Normally, moon shining on water is way brighter than land, but we invented electricity and we have a lot of developments along the coast. So the moon and water cannot compete. It's all about LED lights and ambiance and aesthetics. So all of our hatchlings go the wrong ways. Not limited to hatchlings, because adult turtles get disoriented too. And after nesting, many of them get confused about where the sea is. They also crawl in the wrong way. And often that's fatal. They fall off of walls and break their necks. They get trapped in boulders and drown. They get into the road and they get hit by cars. They get into empty lots or abandoned houses and they just sit and die of heat stroke or dehydrate. Predation, poaching, temperature, that speaks into climate change. Sea turtle eggs are temperature sex determined. So the warmer it gets, the more females you get. And there are many beaches across the world that are feminized, which means that every single turtle egg that's laid on that beach that produces a hatchling will produce a female hatchling, unless that temperature is mitigated. So that's a whole other concern. Loss of nesting habitat. Beaches are just disappearing. Bycatch, that has to do with fisheries. Entanglement is fishing gear. Disease, things like fibropapilloma, which is a tumor-based disease that affects green turtles. Boat strikes, physical hazards that are on land, etc., etc., etc. So one of the things, I'm just going to talk about like one of them to give you guys, I don't know, a little idea of what it's all about. So development is a big one. I bragged just now about our increased numbers of nesting females. What this means is that we now have increased interaction between our newly increased population of turtles and all of the hazards that have been created in the meantime, because in these 20, 30 years, it's not just turtles that have been increasing, but the development has been increasing as well. Barbados has been exploiting our coastline to the max. If there's a piece of land that is not earning us foreign exchange or housing tourists, it is wasted. And that seems to be the general attitude that we have. We have, I think, about 4 or 5 massive tourism projects, humongous hotels that are currently being built as we speak. So what does this mean? Increased light pollution, increased hatchling misorientation, we talked about, altered nesting distribution. So lighting on the shore can determine where turtles go to lay their eggs because they try to avoid brightly lit areas. So an amazing, wide, perfect beach for nesting that is brightly lit will not receive as many turtles as a very poor, narrow, pretty, shitty beach for nesting if it is dark and attractive. Increased coastal armoring. We've gotten a lot of money in the last few years in order to increase our coastal armoring to protect our infrastructure and our property from the effects of climate change. Nobody wants a Category 2 hurricane to come and destroy a $44 million house. Nobody wants to lose road infrastructure and have coastlines cut off. So what we have done, our mangroves were destroyed many years ago. So there is no mangrove restoration possible because the mangroves are gone and the beaches have villas and condos, etc. on them. So we have switched to engineering. And so coastal armoring, which normally includes seawalls with boulder embankments in front of them, breakwaters, groins, or even boardwalks is what coastal armoring looks like. This leads to reduced hatching success for turtles, as well as loss of nesting females. What does that look like? So we also have, super quick, climate change, loss of nests and hatchlings, loss of nesting beaches, reduction in quality of nesting beaches, physical hazards, psychological changes, etc. So this is an example of what happened in the wake of a storm. So when we have limited nesting beaches, which we have right now, what you have is really high nesting density. So this is a 1 meter square, and they are 6 turtle nests laid within 1 meter. We had a hurricane on July 1st in 2024. That was Hurricane Beryl, and she decimated our coastlines. It was not a direct hit, and we're very grateful for that. But some of our beaches did not have 2 grains of sand to rub together after she was gone. So this one hurricane, helped. Well, first to just say that the majority of our nests are laid in June and July. So the hurricane on July 1st took nearly every nest that had been laid to that date. So a single hurricane can destroy a season of nesting. This is an example. This was a sandy beach prior to the hurricane. So just going to show you some pictures really quickly of what our beaches look like after the hurricane. Where that paddle board was, that was the height of the beach. Again, the beach is completely gone. This is a hotel that used to have 3 and 4 rows of beach chairs in front of these barricades. This is a beach where all of the sand on the beach was pushed across the boardwalk and into the KFC car park. So what happens when we have these massive swells? People panic because they want to protect their property. They want to protect the coastline. They want coastal resilience, and they want it yesterday. We talked about they want coastal resilience yesterday. What does that mean? Well, they want their properties to be protected. And one of the things we have in Barbados is a mechanism that facilitates this. So we have our planning department, and normally there's a quite involved planning process that requires consultation with stakeholders. In some cases, you might need an EIA, etc. However, if there is damage to your property that needs to be repaired immediately, you can get something called an emergency permit, an emergency permission. And essentially, somebody just has to come out, take a look. Yes, I see the damage. This is bad. This needs to be fixed. And you will get permission to fix your property. What some people do is they take that permission and exploit it, and they creep forward a little further on the beach. They do a little more work, like you had a patio that needed to be fixed, and when you fix it, you add on a deck. So there's a lot that kind of slips through the cracks there. And this is some of the works. What happened was that this storm, remember, was on the 1st of July. So all of this work, this was dug out to replace this wall, was occurring in the middle of the nesting season. So most of the beaches were gone, and the beaches that were left, a lot of people started to do construction almost immediately. An example of trenches, just open hazards for turtles to come up and fall down inside of. And the problem is that properties were damaged, people were panicked, and we needed to to rebuild, we needed to increase resilience, we needed to do all of these things. So I guess you could say the emphasis was social. And this is one of the things that is really interesting, because in the wake of any disaster, it is going to be people first. Is that wrong? No, it is not. Of course not. But we have to be really careful that as we put people first, we don't completely decimate our biodiversity and our ecosystems and our wildlife in the process. Because after people have recovered a bit, that same ecosystem is what their quality of life is going to depend on post-hurricane, post-natural disaster. So this is just a quick example. This was some work. This is a turtle nest that was almost fully developed, and it was dug up in the course of the construction of this seawall. You can also see that there was a lot of siltation, a lot of fine materials going out to sea as a result of the work that was being done. The seawalls that people put in to protect the property. Here, this is basically the picture at the bottom where you can see the hole. That is a turtle that is trapped in a seawall during construction. Here we have the turtle sitting below the white wall. That's the turtle that fell off of a seawall after construction. She broke her neck, she died. And of course, any eggs that are laid at the base of seawalls, because walls intensify wave action, they're very, very vulnerable to erosion, and any swells we have at all, those nests will go. Boulder-based structures are particularly difficult, and this is something that as groins and breakwaters have expanded across our coastline, that we have seen more and more. The simple fact is that any turtle that becomes trapped in a boulder-based structure will die. There's literally no in between. Unless there is human intervention, if a turtle gets trapped in boulders, it's dead. It could be, often they will go down between the boulders head first, and when the tide comes in, they will drown. Sometimes they're trapped upright, and they are cooked by the sun, and they dehydrate, and they die. This is kind of very old, loosely packed breakwater. Normally, the boulders that are used are granite. Well, in recent times, they're granite, and they're much bigger. And when the turtles slip between them, the turtle is just not visible. A lot of turtles we have found, because persons have been walking across the boulders to go fishing, glance down, and there's like a turtle down inside. Some of those boulders, if I climb down between them, the boulder comes to about my armpit, like right up here. So the turtle is way down. We've had situations where we have had to call, this is the Barbados Fire Service, using the jaws of life to shift boulders to help us to get a turtle that was trapped from down between them. And these are all boulders at different locations. This one, the last one where you can see my foot in the picture, that turtle is sitting on the ground under the boulder. So she slipped down and then turned, and it was almost impossible to get her out. Now, the thing is that boulders are an attractive solution. Boulders are used to trap sand. They're used to build beaches. Whenever people make arguments for boulders, they say that they are rehabilitating the coastline. They are protecting ecosystems. This is a climate resilient strategy. But what we have to recognize that in our efforts to make ourselves more resilient to climate change, remember Greta Thunberg said that the house is on fire, and when a house is on fire, you panic. You don't make calm, considered, measured decisions. You just start pelting water, pelting sand, pelting, the sheet, anything you catch your hand on, you pelting at the fire. And I think that is, in some cases, what is happening. And so with boulder, people are like, we don't have time for mangroves to grow. We don't have time for coral reefs to be rebuilt. We have boulder reefs now. So the reef is dead. Cool. We put down some 5-ton boulders, and that will be our reef. That is going to break the waves. That is going to save us. The beaches are eroding. Breakwater, break waves, groin, trap sand, trucks bring new sand, and we are good to go. Tourism product safe, maintained, money secured. The problem is that there are all of these consequences, which sometimes you get the impression that it's collateral damage. And it's because we're balancing these scales, and things that affect people, things that affect livelihoods, things that affect our national economies are always going to weigh higher than things that affect biodiversity, especially individual species. So on that cheerful note, some food for thought. Are you in it for the long haul? Sea turtles in Barbados, we have managed to restore their, I wouldn't say restore their populations, we've managed to increase their populations, but in a very hostile environment. We recognize that without human intervention, the population would very quickly crash. What does that mean? It means that as we restore the species, we're recognizing that for the foreseeable future, they will need our help. So are you in it for the long haul? You're going to do it for a year, 5 years, 30 years, your entire life? What is it going to be? What can we do to treat the disease and not just the symptoms? So I mentioned things like picking up 50,000 baby turtles. And when I say things like, oh, this year we've rescued 68,000 baby turtles one by one, people are like, yay, yay. And I'm like, that's not a good thing, because we're rescuing them because our situation on the ground is so bad that none of these turtles are going to the sea on their own. That is a terrible thing. I should be hiding my face when I say that. I should be shamed, because picking up baby turtles is treating to the symptom. Turtles going the wrong way is not the problem. The problem is our coastal lighting, which is atrocious, and we have no lighting legislation. We have very little control. Anytime you mention lights, we hear crime and violence. So, you know, it is, and there's tourists who need to feel safe, and there's all of these things, and violence in the Caribbean in 2026, y'all know, we're all from the Caribbean, y'all know it's rough. So anything that you say, oh, beaches should be darker, oh, let's use amber and red lights instead of white lights, people are gonna be like, where and who and are you crazy? So how do we treat the disease and make real tangible change, as opposed to spending money all of the time putting plasters on sores, as we were saying in Barbados? What are the innovative funding mechanisms? Like, it is cool to go cap in hand. Some of us are able to write amazing proposals. Proposals need a lot of work. After you write your proposal, you have to send in reports. And at the end of the day, even if the grant is a 5-year grant, that year 5 is going to come, and you're going to have to start all over again. All of the people you're able to hire, the amazing work you were able to do while that money was flowing, in order to maintain it, you have to try to find someone who's willing to give you the same amount or more, and that can be very hard. If you look at the global climate, we had a grant from USAID when that organization was essentially dismantled. And I think that grant was over 70,000 US dollars. And just like that, it was gone. So what are the innovative financing mechanisms that are going to mean that we are not dependent on donations and grants and benevolence? Are we going to get endowments? Are we going to start to do business that generates income? Are we going to have investment funds to help specifically for charities and NGOs and other conservation initiatives? How are we going to be able to, one, support our people like us, but also support our species, support our ecosystems, and support our countries? And finally, how do we bring the value of the environment to the people? And I think in small islands in the Caribbean, this is a particularly big one, because a lot of what happens depends on political will. We see it all the time. There are certain pieces of legislation that have been drafted and waiting 30 years to get passed. And then all of a sudden, there's like tint legislation that is drafted in 2 weeks and about to go through Parliament. Or there is, something else going on. And so a lot of change is driven by political will. And what moves the hand of a politician is often the opinion of the public. So if the opinion of the public impacts the decision makers, then we have to impact the opinion of the public. So how do we bring the value of the environment, the value of sea turtles, other than, oh my God, they're so cute, and corals are so pretty and tourists like to see them? How do we bring that value to the people in a way that they understand, so that we can, yes, we want to change behavior on behalf of the actual conservation initiatives, but we want to change their opinions. We want to make them vocal. We want to make all of them advocates and activists and lobbyists, so that it's not just a small minority, maybe with big voices, but who could easily be shoved to a side and shut up. But it's the majority of our people who are pushing our politicians for change. So in spite of all of the negativity, what I would say, what I do, how I keep going, is that I focus on the individual. If all I do for the next 20 years is save one turtle or one hatchling, and I improve the chance of the species, then I think that I have done, I've done something great. So please don't listen to me and be discouraged. That is not the purpose, but we got to keep it real because this is the situation that we are in. So I would like to thank you very much for your time and your attention. And yeah, that's it.
I was clapping again and it wasn't on. But thank you so much, Carla. Honestly, as someone who also comes from sea turtle conservation, it is very hard. And thank you for even shedding light on all of that, the hardships that we go through. It is definitely more than, oh my gosh, you work with turtles. That's so cute. That's the best job in the world. It's real hard work. It's dealing with a lot of lack of legislation and frustrations with people who don't understand of the actual science that goes behind it and the well-being of these lovely animals. So I get you more than anything. Before I go to you, Kavon, I'm just going to ask, I'm just going to read Bianca's question in the chat. It was asking about any thoughts given to possibly installing red lights along the coast to reduce turtle disorientation. I think she's referring to turtle-friendly lighting. Is there any in Barbados, actually?
So Barbados is a special case. Our beaches are, so one of the kind of, I guess you would say, flagship areas for sea turtle friendly lighting is Florida. Florida has massive wide beaches and they have sand dunes, which also help to block the light, and they install sea turtle friendly lighting. In Barbados, we have beaches that are about, in some cases, 10 meters wide, and the hotels are 12 stories tall. And so sea turtle friendly lighting is, I think, very, very important. But I think because of our particular circumstances, it's not going to solve the problem. So we will still have disorientation. We have massive sky glow. So even if all of the lights along the coastline are sea turtle friendly, the properties right behind those and right behind those and right behind those will still ensure that the sky is brighter. What we've done in terms of sea turtle friendly lighting, we have worked with the Barbados Light and Power Company. We surveyed the entire island. We identified all of our street lights that were causing problems for sea turtles. We prepared a document with all the pole numbers, the GPS coordinates, etc. And it took years, maybe 5 to 10 years, but they have started to switch those problem street lights to sea turtle friendly street lights. So we have and that has, at 1 or 2 locations, that really has made a huge difference for hatchlings going into the road. In terms of individual properties, our problem is that there's no legislation. So I can sit down, I can work, I can network, I can knock on your door, follow your car, convince property managers of the benefit of turtle-friendly lights, get somebody that's sympathetic, get all of the lights changed, and then 6 months later, he gets transferred to Mexico. A new general manager comes to the hotel and is like, what's all this? What's going on here? And I blink and walk down the beach and now every light is blue. So without legislative change that is making it happen, then it is very difficult. We also have a lot of restaurants. We have a lot of people. There was one point where somebody asked, I never forget this, where somebody asked if saving turtles is more important than saving lives, because people were saying there was a particular area that they wanted lights put up because somebody had been robbed, some tourists had been robbed, and they thought it was too dark, and they were told that it's a turtle nesting beach, so they can't add any additional lighting. And there was a huge uproar because you're putting human safety on the one side and turtles, and you're saying because of the turtles, you are going to be unsafe. That is, of course, not at all true, but that is the rhetoric that is often bandied about. So anytime it is raised, that is what is discussed. So at the moment, things in Barbados are a bit tense because we are having some increased crime. I will be honest about that. And so any talk of turtle-friendly lighting or red lights, as people like to say, they don't have to be red. Modern technology has advanced. but there is significant pushback. We are working on it, and our goal is national coastal legislation that will ensure that sea turtle-friendly lakes are on every coastal property, but it really has been an uphill battle. We've been speaking with the IDB about it and some other agencies, so we're hoping that we will get some support there. But at present, we do have some properties that have done it voluntarily, and we have the government. We've spoken with the National Conservation Commission in charge of all of our beach facilities and so on, and they have switched out their lakes to turtle-friendly lakes as well. So we're making small strides, but our eventual goal is national policy.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. Kavan, would you like to go next?
All right, so my question was partially answered in the last response, but there's still a lot to unpack, so I'll proceed. My area, well, is not significantly close to yours. It's more on the side of law and business. And in that, one of the challenges we usually see is finding a way to convince somebody that the thing you're trying to implement is important to them or that they want it to exist. So if I transfer the logic, I'll just ask a question. What ways have you come up with, or maybe you have in mind, to convince persons that they need the turtles around, they need them to exist? How can you make it important to them so that they would prioritize the existence and the safety of the turtles? And I think that's one of the key questions that needs to be answered.
Okay, so one of the things that has happened is that sea turtles have become very common in our water. So we now have an abundance of juvenile green turtles, and there's a huge tourism industry around swim with the turtles. So they're catamaran tours, they are glass bottom boats, they are all kinds of things. So there's an entire really big sector of our tourism industry that sees the value of sea turtles to their tourism product. In addition to that, if you go to almost any hotel or tourism business, you'll see that turtles are in their logos, turtles are on their websites, turtles are on their brochures. Whenever you go to the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. and they go anywhere overseas, any underwater photo, reef photo, whatever, will have sea turtles plastered all over it. If you go to any souvenir shop, like 70% of the souvenirs are sea turtles, and then you have like Banks Bear and green monkeys and a couple other things. So the value is there. Poaching, for example, is very limited. The buy-in from local people is great. In terms of collecting hatchlings, often they collect the hatchlings from the time they come up. They call us. Persons want to help. We get, for example, when we have applications open for our teams, we have maybe about 40 spaces. We get over 90 people filling out application forms to join the team. So there's really, I think, really good recognition of the value of sea turtles, especially coming from a country where people used to line up prior to 1998 to get a cut of sea turtle meat. Now people line up in droves to see sea turtles nesting and to see hatchlings. So I think from where tourism is concerned, the benefit is observed. We are involved in, for example, the planning process. So they do reach out to us and ask us to submit comments whenever there's a coastal proposal. Planning will institute conditions on properties to put in sea turtle friendly lighting. The problem is with many government agencies that they have limited capacity and limited human resources as well. So the ability to enforce in that instance is perhaps not where it should be. Also, we have a great deal of just interest generally, I think, from the public where turtles are concerned. So I don't think there's anybody in Barbados that would, if you ask them if sea turtles are important, that would say no. Everybody, I think, on the island agrees that turtles are important. I think what it comes down to is when you have to weigh, like when you have limited money and you have to buy food and pay your light bill, and you're like, what do you do? They're both important. And I think that is the situation we have. People will accept that sea turtles are important. They're important to tourism. They're important to a variety of things, but they're going to say we need new hotel rooms, we need new tourism products, we need beaches, like, you know, and they will say when we make these wide beaches, we're making beaches for turtles to nest on as well, not just tourists. So it is a struggle. Barbados is small. We don't, other than tourism, you know, sugar is dead, basically. Other than tourism and our people, there really isn't much. So it is a difficult position. Is there a lot more that can be done? Yes. I think getting people to move from, yes, turtles are important, to what I as an individual can do to safeguard sea turtles is where we need to go.
Thank you, Carla, for answering that question. We'll do one last question, and that's from me. So I actually have visited, and I visit Barbados quite frequently. So I definitely always try and look to see any turtle nesting going on. I'm actually wondering if you guys have a little database or you record any of the malformations that you do come across, because that is a PhD of mine that I am planning to go into implementing next year, hopefully. And I think you know Alejandro Pratt. Um, he did some work with the Barbados Sea Turtle Project a few years ago, and he speaks quite highly of you and says he knows you quite well. So he's my coworker and has even pushed me to even have this thing. So I definitely wanted to know if you guys keep records of your malformations.
When you say malformations, you're talking about hatchling mutations?
Yes. Yeah, so like leucism, two heads, missing an eye.
We do, and to be quite honest, it is not super frequent, as it is in other places. So I mentioned our the conservation side of things, but we also collect a ridiculous amount of data. As I mentioned before, we were based at the University of the West Indies. We're all scientists. And I have a very, very strong belief that, you know, more is more. So we collect a lot of data on nesting female behavior, nesting site choice. We've been doing some temperature studies, looking at impacts on incubation. We do a lot of nest excavations to look at hatching success and how that may be impacted by positioning and shading and substrate and all kinds of things. So one of the things that we try to do is to create that body of work, that body of data, so that we're able to present it when we have to make a case or make an argument. And I think that's something that's really important. The conservation side of things, the actual saving of the animals is critical, but we need the research, we need the numbers, so that when we go to government and we say, this thing that you have done has killed a lot of turtles, people are like, well, what's a lot? Is that 3? Is that 30? What is a lot? If we go and we say that nesting, since you have built your boardwalk, nesting on this beach has been reduced from 500 sea turtle activities annually to 16. Or if I go to somebody and say, your lights over the past 5 years have killed 75,000 hatchlings, as opposed to saying your lights are killing hatchlings. So having that data, having the numbers, data are so important in just giving gravity to your point and to showing that you're serious and to presenting a case. So that's the one thing I would do. You may not be able to collect a lot of data, but whenever you're doing conservation action, even if you are focused on saving something, it is really important that you keep records so that you're able to demonstrate the impact of your work or the impact of whatever environmental degradation or issue you're trying to combat is having on the species or ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you can connect in the future when I do start doing this PhD. I definitely want to do a comparison of Caribbean islands. So I just wanted to also bring back Zoya, if she's still with us. That's all.
Yes, I'm here.
I wanted to mention Ashley's comments beforehand. She said in the chat, any noted changes in better disease management based on species selection and distribution? Also, how are the biodiversity changes in terms of encroaching wildlife after starting regeneration efforts?
Okay, thank you. And my apologies, Ashley. I didn't realize it was for me. I thought it was for the coral reef question. But if I'm interpreting it correctly, you're asking about disease management as in human disease and, the wetlands attract mosquitoes type angle. So I personally haven't noticed any changes in terms of disease management or like mosquito proliferation, depending on the mangrove restoration activities, because a mangrove is going to be a mangrove, I think, no matter which species are making up that particular forest. So if it is a fringing forest that is very tidally connected, the water is flowing, you're not going to have much of a mosquito issue. If it's a semi-enclosed site that doesn't flush as often, and you do have standing water, you're still going to have mosquitoes. I have not found that the actual species composition within a forest affects how many mosquitoes or the disease risk associated.
I think I need to change the direction a little bit. So when I said disease management, I actually meant in terms of plant diseases, like in terms of the mangroves themselves.
Okay, great. Also, thank you for clarifying. No, because we have not, as I've mentioned before, most of the planting previous to this research has been very monospecific. It's been a lot of just red mangrove, red mangrove, red mangrove. And even with the monocultures, we have not had a lot of incidences of disease among seedlings or disease within, plots or regeneration sites. And for newer sites where we're trying to incorporate a greater diversity of species, we have not noticed any disease transfer between seedlings either. I've noticed that black mangroves, for instance, have a very specific fungi that affects them, but it doesn't transfer to the other species. So no, that's not a change that we have noticed, but I think it's definitely something worth looking into. And for the second question about wildlife, we don't collect, well, Grenada doesn't have a ton of terrestrial wildlife, native terrestrial wildlife. In terms of birds, I can say that we have baseline bird data for most of our restoration sites, and all of our restored mangroves are among the highest or most diverse birding sites on the island. And that number has increased with regeneration and, with the 5, 10, 15 years post replanting. So the site has come into itself and really flourished in terms of the bird community. In terms of other species, not directly to answer, but kind of the flip side of that is some other research has showed that we have a high incidence or more detections of invasive mammals, for instance, mongoose and cats and dogs on the edges of mangrove forests. So not looking at the positive effects of restoration, but the negative effects of fragmentation and the negative effects of clearing. So where you have more wetland edge, you tend to have more mammalian predators. So that can be a negative impact. But the birds are doing well. I haven't looked into many of the other species. As I said, we don't have any native, we have many native terrestrial mammals, and the fish community is a different, a different group of people. But thank you for your question.
Thank you so much for your answer. And I would urge you to look into those as places where you could diversify your own studies, because in terms of the disease aspect with mangroves, I'm just thinking of it from a baseline plant perspective. What we look at in terms of incorporating different species into a space is being able to limit transfer of disease. So if you have access to a site along your way that actually has a large problem with disease in the mangroves, it could be worth looking at how incorporating a mixture of species in a particular format could actually help to limit that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that recommendation.
Okay, also we are coming down to the wire. We've had a lot of really great panelists, presentations, everything was great, honestly. So I am just going to wrap it up and say, and just do our honorable mentions. Sorry, also if you hear my dogs, they're having their zoomies time. This is some of I skipped one. Some of our honorable mentions of some of our members in the GYBN Caribbean chat where we are showcasing their conservation work. We have Trinity from Antigua and Barbuda, Tamika also from Antigua and Barbuda, and Brianna from Trinidad and Tobago. They're all doing a lot of conservation work and helping build biodiversity throughout the region, and we're so thankful that we get to highlight them. Also, we have Devin Critchlow from Guyana, and Vivian Andel, and Bianca Giddens from Grenada and St. Lucia. All of them are like snakes. That's what I'm seeing. For some reason, you like to hold snakes. But I'm personally a marine person. I deal with the turtles. But I am really happy that we get to showcase these people and hopefully get to showcase even more people at the next webinar for Biodiversity Matters. That's basically it, guys. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much again to all the panelists. And if you have any further questions, please email them to us so we can put you in contact with the people who presented, and you can talk to them any further and hopefully connect further. Please follow our links, our social media links. There's several ways that you can interact with us. And yeah, everyone, thank you so much for even being here. Have a good rest of your Thursday night. Happy Earth Week. And we will see you guys another time.
Bye.
Bye.